From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Suni Gray. The UN has urged Guatemala to transfer the responsibilities of the International Commission against Impunity to national institutions. President Jimmy Morales expelled the UN mission over the weekend. The decision came just after Congress announced it will discuss plans to remove Morales' immunity. This will pave the way for an investigation to be conducted into the corruption allegations against him. The UN says this represents a setback in the prosecution, investigation, and dismantling of criminal networks in the country. Venezuela has confirmed several planes will arrive to Caracas in the next few days. Migrants will return from Ecuador, Peru, and Argentina. So far, 89 citizens have returned from Peru and 185 from Brazil. The measure is part of the Return to the Homeland program. President Nicolas Maduro has been calling on Venezuelans who left to return home and participate in the new economic measures. Dozens of Venezuelan migrants are lining up at the Venezuelan embassy in Peru to sign up for their ride home. They say they were given fake promises of work before leaving Venezuela. They've also been the target of xenophobic attacks. Venezuela will begin to pilot a new system for selling gasoline on Tuesday. The scheme will be tested at gas stations in 8 border states. Gasoline has been smuggled from the country, especially into Colombia. The new system will cut subsidies and raise the price to international levels. Many Venezuelans still get cheap fuel if they present their homeland card. Colombia's Supreme Court has rejected another legal challenge filed by the former president, Alvaro Uribe. Uribe filed the challenge against the judges in charge of a fraud investigation of him, but the court believes the reasons presented by his legal team are not valid. The case against the former president began in February. And the National Liberation Army in Colombia says it will release kidnapped military and police personnel. This despite not reaching an agreement with the government. The armed group is afraid that the safety of the captives could be at risk as more time passes. The ELN has also asked international organizations and the church to support the operation. The government has been reluctant to resume negotiations with the ELN. According to President Ivan Duque, the group must stop all of its, quote, criminal activities before this can happen.
We are aware that the government will not facilitate an agreement for the release of the kidnapped. Time goes by and the risk of tragedy increases for the life and well-being of those captives. The government has opposed to third parties participating and guaranteeing the safety of the operation. For this reason, a release that could have been done 3 weeks ago hasn't happened yet.
And another social leader has been killed in northern Colombia. The victim was the president of the Community Action Board in the municipality of Terrassa. According to eyewitness reports, a group of hooded men shot the victim dead near his home. Social organizations have condemned the attack. They are demanding that the government protect social leaders. And thousands have marched in Argentina against the austerity measures announced by President Mauricio Macri. They are angry about the adjustment policy, saying that they will increase suffering. On Monday, Macri announced up to 11 ministries will be removed and a new tax on exports will be enforced.
Halving ministries implies a really dire situation for the public administration and state. They're reducing the state. They're shrinking it. The state is losing its power to regulate.
A huge indignation, an overact, rehearsed speech that doesn't take care of the disaster they have done because they impoverish us and they send the money abroad.
Finance Minister Nicolas Dujovne is meeting the head of the International Monetary Fund on Tuesday. He wants to negotiate an early payment of $29 billion to cover next year's budget. But critics say the government is just pushing the country into more debt. Macri's cabinet signed a $50 billion loan with the financial institution, the largest in history. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has more.
A day after President Mauricio Macri imposed new economic measures in an attempt to slow down the crisis, the dollar continues its steady rise over the peso, and the stock exchange continues to drop. Inflation is well on its way to reaching 46%, as was forecast by the government itself. At the start of the year, inflation was forecast at just 10%, but that number has clearly skyrocketed, highlighting the failure of the Macri administration. Today, also the rise of fuel prices by 12%, which could eventually lead to rising prices for basic food items and cost of living expenses. Yet wages remain stagnant. Looting has started in some cities, in particular in Chaco, where a 13-year-old child was shot dead by security forces.
We thank Ricardo Esteban for that report, and now let's get more details on the currency crisis in Argentina in this report.
After a series of economic adjustments, Argentine President Mauricio Macri addressed the nation. However, people were expecting more than just a speech. They were expecting him to change his policies.
This can't all change in an instant. It's a gradual process. We had to change many things that were not favorable for everyone, but were necessary. What we did was to ask the world for some help.
After his short presidential address, Macri explained why he decided to close down 10 ministries. He also confirmed he would raise tariffs on soy and other grains. After his measures were announced, the Minister of Economy, Nicolás Duhavne, gave a speech as well.
We
must admit that we made some mistakes. Argentina's weak position forced us into this situation. Our intention is to bring solution to all the challenges we are facing. At the same time, we must take care of the most vulnerable section of the society, reduce the taxes and the fiscal deficit. We didn't take enough care of the fiscal issues before, and that has greatly affected Argentina in comparison to those countries who have balanced fiscal record.
Duhavne promised a balanced budget after a high fiscal deficit this year. Public education funding was badly affected following corruption allegations against some government officials.
In 2019, instead of aiming for the original goal of 1.3% of deficit, we will work for fiscal balance and not in the payment of interests. This means that we will save $6 billion that we won't need to return to the international market. In 2020, we will have more than fiscal balance. We will have a surplus of 1%, which will save us another $5.2 billion.
With these weak measures taken by the government, experts say the officials want to dollarize the economy. Experts also fear the way it can affect the country.
For that to happen, by our calculations, the dollar would have to cost 85 pesos. At that level, our domestic market will be ruined. It would lead to the collapse of Argentinian society. It's not viable.
While these changes by the government are meant to stabilize the fluctuating market, the peso remains historically low. The Ministry of Economy, Duhavne, will be traveling to Washington to renegotiate the loan agreement with the IMF.
Brazil's Workers' Party has announced it will present an appeal to the Supreme Federal Court. It wants to guarantee the presidential candidacy of the former president, Luiz Ignacio Lula da Silva. The PT will also appeal to the United Nations. Its Human Rights Committee had said that Lula's political rights need to be respected. Vice presidential candidate Fernando Haddad says the party will continue appealing to all instances in order to secure his candidacy. However, the PT is banned from using Lula's images in any of its ad campaigns. And people are calling on Brazil's Supreme Court to prosecute presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro for electoral insult, incitement to crime, and threatening language. Over the weekend, the far-right candidate said that members of the opposition Workers' Party should be shot. He already has charges against him for racism and rape apology.
We will shoot down members of the Workers' Party in Acre. We will make them flee, and since they like Venezuela so much, they'll have to go there and they will eat grass, because they don't even have mortadella.
We'll take a short break now. More news in a minute. Welcome back. The new members of Colombia's National Electoral Council have taken office. Critics say the 9 people who were chosen represent the interests of the right wing.
President Iván Duque has sworn in the new members of the National Electoral Council. They will be in charge of monitoring political parties and their electoral campaigns.
This National Electoral Council that has been sworn in should be our allies for our reform agenda, for a new democratization, so all citizens have access to political representation.
President Duque made a call for the new members to promote electoral reform aimed at developing a greater democratization within the political parties.
What the country needs is an electoral reform. During the last elections, not many campaign ads were used, but they did have a high participation level. There were free citizens going to the polls to fight corruption.
Despite the call made by Duque to promote democracy, some critics say that this task is almost impossible, as the council is structured with political quotas.
The National Electoral Council has had a problem as their members are chosen by Congress. This depends on the party's representation. This means that the council is sort of a representation of Congress, and that compromises its independence.
The new council has the challenge of proposing a new electoral reform by 2019.
Bolivia has a new foreign minister. Diego Paré was sworn in on Tuesday. He is of indigenous descent and belongs to the Quechua community. He has previously worked as Bolivia's ambassador to the Organization of American States. Paré replaces Fernando Guanacuni. And the presidents of Peru and Bolivia have finished their 4th bilateral summit. They discussed the construction of the bi-oceanic train and regional development.
Bilateral cabinet summits between Bolivia and Peru started in 2015. So far, there's been an 80% completion rate on agreements to date.
It's important to record our efforts to clean up Lake Titicaca. Contaminated water from both countries flows into that lake. So we have both compromised to fix the issue in the short term.
The summit was held in the city of Cobija, near the border with Peru. Agreements on border security, fighting drug trafficking, as well as other issues were made. Another topic that was up for discussion was continuing the construction of the bi-oceanic train.
This train will be part of intercontinental trade. The port of Ilo will be a strategic point for imports and exports. Billions of products will go through there.
This train plans to join the Atlantic Ocean with the Pacific, covering nearly 4,000 kilometers. It has an investment of $14 billion.
All of South America will see the benefit. I have said before, this is the biggest physical integration project of the 21st century.
On a 42-point declaration, both governments announced they will push for the future of the Union of South American Nations, UNASUR, so it may once again work for integration. The 5th bilateral summit will be held in Peru in 2019.
Argentina's former president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, will go on trial in February 2019. So far, 12 businessmen and high-ranking officials linked to the case have been arrested. Fernández has denied any wrongdoing. She has also denounced these proceedings as a political persecution. And congressmen from different political parties in Peru have called for the Attorney General, Pedro Chavarri, to resign. Along with other authorities, he has been accused of corruption and allegedly having links to a criminal organization. Through an official statement, Chavarri said he would not resign since there is no evidence or legal basis for those accusations. And in Honduras, 2 boys taking part in a student protest were found dead. Now, a leaked video supposedly showing the 2 students being arrested just before they were killed has caused outrage.
In the week before the murder of Gerson Daniel Mesa and Mario Enrique Suarez, there were several students' protests against price increases.
We have 3 demands: the reduction of fuel prices to the previous one, and immediate freezing. The next point, that the previous transport fare returns.
Mario Enrique Suarez had participated in this protest, and days later he was dead, along with his friend. Hours later, the footage, which allegedly shows them being arrested, began to circulate.
This has all the features of an execution. These young men were dragged out of their houses, then according to forensics, tortured in an unknown place, tied up, and then murdered with a firearm.
Immediately, a police spokesperson denied it, arguing that they were criminal gangs wearing fake uniforms.
The name time shown in these beds are bigger than the officially used by the Technical Criminal Investigation Bureau, in the same way the color is different from the official yellow shade.
Meanwhile, in the school where Mario studied, fear is in the air among students, teachers, and parents.
We're shocked because what we are living is violence taking the lives of the young away. Whether it comes from pseudo-police groups or from organized crime that breaks the law, we're worried about one thing. Until some years ago, the concept of youth was respected.
Despite the fear of violence the state is using, students are determined to make a stand. A protest is expected in front of the UN office.
Mexico's outgoing president, Enrique Peña Nieto, has delivered his final State of the Nation address. Peña Nieto said his government's strategy against drug cartels managed to reduce the capacity of those organizations, but explained this also caused the breakdown of the criminal groups into smaller ones, increasing violence. Experts say his administration was marked by corruption scandals and gang violence. A mass poisoning has affected more than 300 children in the coastal area of Chile. Relatives of the victims are asking the government for help.
Residents in the communities of Puchincaví and Quinteros have used social media to tell the world their children were victims of mass poisoning. They denounced it before this became news.
We were in class and suddenly all of us began fainting. There was an unbearable smell.
Since then, 2 weeks have passed. There are more than 300 children affected. A toxic cloud coming from an industrial camp dating back to the 60s is believed to be responsible for the events. The Regional Service of Health has identified methylchloroform in the air. The use of this substance has been forbidden in the country since 2015 because it affects the blood system and cardiorespiratory and central nervous system.
She felt weak. She had a lot of headaches. She also felt fatigue in her legs. We immediately decided to take her to the hospital. When the doctors began to examine her, they discovered she lost sensibility in her legs.
Despite the government order the children to be examined, the Minister of Health has dismissed the consequences of the poisoning.
I wanted to contradict the Minister of Health. I want to say that children didn't have a normal reaction to the toxic cloud. The victims suffered from nausea and paralysis.
Local media eventually reported on what happened. The Minister of Health retracted from its statement, and President Sebastián Piñera announced an intervention plan in the area.
Guyana's Ministry of Education is assuring parents that all schools will reopen Tuesday after teachers walked off the job. The teachers' strike closed about 34 schools on Monday, the first day of the school term. Other schools were short-staffed, forcing parents to collect their children. Negotiations between the Guyana Teachers Union and the government have hit a stalemate. Teachers are demanding a 40% wage increase. The government says it cannot afford it. Unions in Trinidad and Tobago are gearing up for a national strike this Friday, but the government is threatening legal action if certain essential service workers walk off the job. The Minister of Public Administration warned that the armed forces, healthcare workers and teachers could face a fine or imprisonment. The unions have vowed to ramp up their actions if the government follows through on their threats.
We stand firmly in solidarity with all the teachers and the problems they have. And if you want to exacerbate the problems that you have already created, just touch one of these trade unions in Trinidad and Tobago.
To Brazil now, where investigators are trying to find out what caused the fire that destroyed the National Museum. Activists are blaming government funding cuts. Police officers say the building didn't seem to have a sprinkler system and had suffered neglect. Investigators are looking into whether an electrical fault was to blame or if a paper lantern landed on the museum's roof.
I think it's essential that there be clarification about the causes of the fire. And at this time, the federal police are concentrated on that. We need to know exactly what happened and what caused this fire. After that, it will also be possible to clarify who is responsible and understand what exactly happened and who is responsible.
Museum curators have been the first to go through the ashes in an attempt to recover what remains of the collection. They wanted to make sure artifacts wouldn't be confused with debris. The museum housed more than 20 million items, including Brazil's oldest human fossil and meteorites. The government says it will seek international help and spend $3.6 billion in rebuilding the collection.
I was in a rush to get in there because I knew how to recognize the meteorites. I knew where they were, so that I could try to recover some. They were brought out of the ashes like a real phoenix.
A group of students gathered in Rio de Janeiro to protest against government's neglect of the museum. They held placards reading National Catastrophe and Culture in Ashes.
The National Museum had very important items. It attracted attention on an international level. There was a lot of research which will now come to an end. An end history will be erased. With this, our memory gets erased too.
The fire has been caused by years of neglect by the federal government. Our anthropology program suffered absurd budget cuts these last 2 years. My anthropology class, for example, suffered a 70% cut from one year to the next.
We'll take a short break now. Don't go away.
Queremos verdad, reparación integral, pero sobre todo justicia, pero justicia social.
How many ways there are to tell a story? The different perspective of our nations are on Telesur documentaries. Sundays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Armed clashes between rebel groups have intensified in the Libyan capital of Tripoli. Over a week of fighting has resulted in the destruction of infrastructure in the city and the closure of the Mitiga airport. The conflict broke out between the group's 7th Brigade against the Tripoli Revolutionaries Brigades and the Nawasi. The fights are seen as the latest episode of conflict since Muammar Gaddafi's fall in 2011. The first trial over the stolen babies case has resumed at a Madrid court in Spain. 85-year-old former gynecologist Eduardo Villa is accused of stealing a baby and giving it to another woman in 1969. He also falsely certified her as the birth mother. He could be sentenced to 11 years in prison. Thousands of baby stealing cases have been reported during the Francisco Franco dictatorship, and they continued until the 1980s. A network of baby nappers took the newborns from their mothers and delivered them to rich families. Rwanda's ruling Patriotic Front is leading the country's parliamentary elections. The Electoral Commission said the results give the ruling party nearly 70% of total votes. The opposition Democratic Green Party and the Socialist Party each received over 4% of the vote, while all independent candidates have less than 1%. A graffiti art festival featuring the artist Diego Velázquez paintings have been livening up the town in Galicia, Spain. Every year since 2008, artists take over the declining neighborhood in Canido in Ferrol to spend 3 days painting their version of Velázquez's famous painting, La Minesnas. According to locals, the festival has attracted more and more visitors, and the population of Ferrol has doubled. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at talisioTV.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Talisio English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.